it's great to actually be able to speak to you all. If I can't see you all, at least I can speak to you all, which is fantastic. But as Sheila said, the topic today is culture and values. Now, I do have a little presentation because I'll make sure that I can pull it up. I'll get rid of that and that. Now, Sheila, can you give me a nod that you guys can see that presentation okay?
Yes, we certainly can. Thanks, Nathan.
Excellent. I thought looking at that is far more interesting than looking at my head, so we'll keep that on as long as we can. If people do have questions, I will save a little bit of time at the end, but if you've got a really crucial one, please write it in the chat. And Sheila, if you can keep an eye on the chat, if a question comes through, just feel free to jump in at any stage.
Yeah, we'll do, Nathan, and we'll also dedicate at the end just a few minutes as well to any other outstanding comments and questions too.
Beautiful. Okay, let's push on. So hopefully I can get this to the next one. Yes, culture. Now, culture, I started working in the management consultancy field or way back in around about 2005 or so, and at that time, culture was huge. We were culture consultants and everything was about culture, and it was really big, but it's tended to die off a little bit. And one of the reasons why it dies off, it gets replaced, it got replaced by engagement, now resilience, and all these different things that come into the workforce. And one of the main reasons why it actually died off a bit was because it's very hard to put your finger on what actually culture is. For a lot of people, you say, what is culture? And they'll say, oh, yeah, every country's got a different culture. You know, they do things differently than what we do, so they've got a culture. And yes, they're right. A lot of people say, yeah, we've got a vision statement and we've got our mission and our values, and that's our culture. And it looks really good on a frame behind the receptionist, or we put it into our proposals or write it up on the wall. That's our culture. And a lot of people say, oh, you know, we've got one, and I think it's a good one, but I can't really define what it is. And because it's really hard to define, then that's why I think it's tended to drop off the radar. But personally, I think any organisation lives and dies by the culture that they create. So, simple definition, simply the way we do things around here. For those of you who have had more than one job in your life, think about the first company, how they did things. Think about the second company. I dare say they do things differently. That's a different culture. For those of you who have been to different life-saving organisations, you'll notice that some clubs do things one way and other clubs do things another way. Simple definition, the way we do things around here is quite simply the culture. Now, here's the crucial part about all of this. You have a culture whether you like it or not. Great teams and organisations design the one that they need in order to be successful. They don't let it evolve by default. Now, evolving by default is often things like the loudest person. So I've been in enough life-saving clubs in my lifetime to know that sometimes they get dominated by the loudest person, and people are too afraid to say, hey, you know what? That may not be the best way to actually go about things. It might be simply that the answer is that's the way we've always done things, and it's worked for us, so why change? If that's the answer that you get when you bring up a question of why do we do things like that, and somebody says, oh, we've always done things like that, well, that's not a good enough answer. It might be, I call them the old-timers or the outlaws. Sometimes if you want to change things, you will have an outlaw who will actively work against what you are trying to change. So all of those things happen by default, and you end up with a culture, whether you like it or not. Now, great teams and organisations, as I said, they design the one that they need to be successful. So they have a really good understanding and vision of, you know what, we need to behave, act, have our system symbols this certain way, and that will get us the success that we want. That'll get us the outcomes that we want. That'll get us the type of club and organisation that we want. Now, what do we need to do to make that come to life? Now, the best way that I can explain this is to give you an example. The example I'm going to give was St Kilda Football Club way back in the late 80s, early 90s. So I arrived at St Kilda Football Club in 1987 as a 17-year-old, and 99% of people, when they come into an organisation, they have their eyes wide open. They look around and say, okay, what do I need to do to fit in around here? Because not many people come in into an organisation and say, right, I'm going to come in at the bottom level and I'm going to change things. I'm going to change the culture, how we do things. They tend to look around and fit in, and over time, they actually fit into the way things are done. Workplace example is that if everybody packs up and goes home at 4:30 on a Friday, pretty soon you'll be doing that too. You won't be sitting there going, why is everyone going at 4:30? I'm staying till 5:30. You'll fall into the way of doing things as well. If you've got a culture of, you know what, we don't actually address problems, we just gather around the water cooler or down at the coffee shop and we whinge about them, over time, you tend to fold into that way of doing things. And that's how cultures get perpetuated. New people coming in, what gets rewarded around here, how do people do things, and you fold in. So when I turned up to the St Kilda Football Club in the late 80s, early 90s, I dare say we were dominated by certain figures, and you can see that man there. So football people will know who that is. That's the great Tony Lockett. Now, Tony's the man who's kicked more goals in AFL football than any other player who's ever played the game. And to say Tony wasn't the fittest player or didn't train really hard is probably an understatement. He got by purely on natural talent. And so we rewarded people with natural talent. You didn't have to work hard, but if you had natural talent, well, then you'd get ahead. And that stadium that you can see there, thankfully it's been pulled down now, but that was where the St Kilda Social Club used to be. So win, lose or draw, we'd head up there after the game, and there probably wasn't a lot of difference in the mood of the room when we won or when we lost. When we won, everyone would be happy and singing "Oh, when the Saints go marching in," and when we lost, pretty much the same thing happened. So that was the culture that I was brought into, and probably perpetuated that culture right through until probably the mid-90s. Now, the mid-90s, there was a bit of a catalyst. Our captain, Danny Frawley, of 9 years, retired. Tony Lockett, our best player, moved to the Sydney Swans. We had another couple of senior players move on as well. And in return for Tony leaving, we got 4 17-year-old players and no senior players. The football world said, all right, that's it for St Kilda Football Club. They're going to be in the wilderness for 5-6 years. Now, there was a few of us who were around about 26, 27 years of age. We thought, hang on, 5 years' time, that's probably going to see us out of our careers. We're not going to have any success in that time. We need to change things. So what we cottoned on to this idea because around about that time the word culture started to become a bit more prevalent. And we said, okay, we can't change our list that much. We only get one chance a year to do that, but we can change our culture. We wanted to be successful. The behaviours that we were doing now weren't leading to that success, so we needed to change them. So this particular model is one that I love personally. Those 7 areas are more of a definition of culture. When I say how we do things around here, it's generally those 7 areas that I'm talking about. And I call them cultural levers. So sometimes with a culture, you might have to just pull 1 or 2 of these levers to make a significant change. Sometimes you have to change all of them. Sometimes you might only need to change 1 of them to get a significant shift in your culture. And I'll explain to you how they work and how they work for us. So we'll start at the top there. Our leadership, we had 1 captain for 9 years, Danny Frawley. And we had no leadership groups or anything like that. Everything fell on the one person's shoulders. We didn't have that big, strong person to be able to carry us anymore. So we said, okay, let's put in place a leadership structure. We had co-captains for the first time. We had a leadership group. We had emerging leaders group and young leaders group. We developed a pathway for leadership. So if people wanted to become captain, there was a pathway up to that point. If they wanted to be part of a leadership group and have a say, there was a pathway they could follow. So we instituted that. Our systems, we changed what got rewarded around the place. It was no longer just the player who got the most possessions that got rewarded. We had one of our supporters donated a spa. And the player who got the most tackles and shepherds and 1%ers, they got rewarded each week, and the one who got the most by the end of the season won a spark. So we changed our system of what got rewarded. Our symbols was an interesting one. Our symbols are quite often the heroes around the place. Who are the heroes? So Tony Lockett was our hero around the place. No longer there. So fortunately, we had a guy like Robert Harvey. So Robert won 2 Brownlow medals for those who don't know. And Robert was just a young player coming through. But in terms of working hard, getting the most out of himself, he was the epitome of that. We always knew when Robert got to training early, because there's a pool of sweat underneath the exercise bike or the running machine. He'd work himself really hard. So we had to put Robert and Stuart Lowe and these guys up on a pedestal and tell the young guys, hey, if you wanted to be good, it wasn't just natural talent. You had to work hard like these players. And our structure, we changed our structure in terms of our leadership groups, which I've already mentioned. The behaviours was the obvious one. The behaviours is the easy one to change. And with our behaviours, it was simply, we had a motto that 100% effort, 100% of the time. So if you were asked to do 10 chin-ups, you had to do 10 chin-ups, not 9 or 8. If you had to run from one cone to the other flat out, well, then you had to run from one cone to the other flat out. And it gave license for other players to then turn around and say, hey, that wasn't good enough. That wasn't 100% effort, 100% of the time. And it referred to your diet, your sleep and rehab and all those other efforts. Communication. In football clubs, sometimes and I dare say in business as well, we're reluctant to actually get to the point of our communication. We might skirt around the edges. If somebody turns up late, we might say something like, hey, did you bring the paper with you? What we really want to say is, hey, I've noticed that you're late, and I want you to know that I know that you're late, but I don't want to address it straight out. So I'll make a bit of a smart aleck comment, and hopefully you'll pick up my drift and understand that I know that you're being late. We couldn't have that sort of conversations anymore. So the conversation had to be immediate and honest. It was, hey, you're late. That's not good enough. You're wasting everybody's time. Get here on time from now on. That sort of conversation needed to take place. And the mindset one was a really interesting one as well. I haven't probably got time today to go through the above and below the line model, but we had to bring in personal responsibility. And by bringing personal responsibility, we had to get out of blame, excuse, denial. We were very good. If we lost a game, who can we blame? What excuses can we make? How can we justify that? We had to get out of that mode and say, we lost a game. What can we do? What is a solution that we could put in place to make sure that we don't lose again next week? So have a far more solution-focused mindset rather than simply a blame, excuse, denial. So we started that at the end of 1995. At the end of 1995, we came 14th out of 16 teams. 1 year into the process, we came 10th out of 16 teams. So a little bit of an improvement. At the end of 1997, at the end of the home and away series, we were first on the ladder. Now, I'm going to put down first. We got through to the grand final, for those who know. We didn't actually win the grand final, but we went from 14th and a team that everybody said they're just going to rebuild. That's the end of the Saints for 5-6 years, to first on the end of the home and away. Not by drafting in a whole bunch of talented players. The young players we got certainly were talented, but they were in their first and second seasons, and we went all the way through to first on the ladder purely by cultural levers. Working on the culture, how we did things, making sure that the way we did things around here were designed to get the successful outcome that we actually wanted. So hopefully, as I was going through those 7 points, you started to think, okay, my club, my organisation, which lever do I need to change? Which lever do I need to pull? Is it the way that we communicate? Is it our symbols? Do we need to change our structure? The behaviours is the easy one. I'm sure you can identify some behaviours that aren't getting you to where you want to be. And you need to have the courage, push through we've always done things like that, push through the loudest person and actually make the change. I guarantee you things can change very, very quickly. So that's an overview of culture and the necessity to actually design it rather than let it evolve by default. Now, values fit into this really, really well. I dare say nearly every organisation that you're part of at the moment do have their values. And I dare say that 90% of those organisations completely waste those values. They probably look great, as I said at the start, on a frame behind the receptionist, in your handouts and things like that, but don't actually use them. A lot of people don't know how to actually use your values. The best thing for me for values, and the most useful thing for values, is simply they help you make decisions. Value-based decision-making is the most vital component of having values and missions and culture and all that sort of stuff. Help you make decisions. There's a quote there from Roy Disney, probably the lesser known of the Disney brothers, but they were certainly a values-based organisation. I'll give you an example of how value-based decision-making works. Quite some time ago now, I was doing some work for Hydro Tasmania. Now, Hydro Tasmania, they kept the lights on down there in Tassie before they put a pipe across the Bass Strait. Now they entered the national electricity market. But they kept the lights on in Tassie, and it was all hydroelectricity dams. They told one particular community who was built up around a dam, they said that we would never lower the water in the dam to the point where you can't get your boats, you can't fish, because this community relied on a lot of tourism, a lot of people coming with boats and fishing. And if they couldn't get the boats in, well, then the community would really, really suffer. So they promised they wouldn't actually lower the dam that low. Except this year there was a particularly nasty drought and they were running out of water. And they had a decision to make. They purchased 4 big diesel generators and they had a decision. Do they turn on the diesel generators and do they go against their green ideals, because they like to say, hang on, we're hydro, we're not coal, we're not this and not that. Do they turn on the generators or do they lower the dam levels? And the CEO at the time got a working party together to come up with an answer. And 1 week went by and 2 weeks went by and 3 weeks went by and they couldn't come up with an answer. They were going backwards and forwards. And he called them in. He said, where are you at with this decision? And they said, look, we don't know. If we lower the dam, well, then we're breaking our promise. If we turn on the diesel, well, then we may not be as green as we otherwise would like to say that we are. We don't know what to do. And the CEO turned around and he said, what's one of our values? And they went through them and they said, a value is honesty. And he said, well, there's your decision right there. And they just stared at him blankly. And he said, what did we tell the people in that community? And they said, we told them we wouldn't lower the dam levels. And he said, well, if we're going to be honest and have integrity, which is another one of their values, he said, we're not doing that. We're switching on the generators. It's an easy decision. You guys have fluffed around for 3-4 weeks with this decision. I've made it within 2 seconds. We said we were going to do something. Our values are honesty, integrity. That's the decision we're going to do. And they did. They turned on the generators for a short period of time until it started raining again. So he was using his values to make a difficult decision. I'm going through this at the moment with AFLW. At the moment with AFLW, how it's worked out is the AFL have said to all of the clubs, you have $511,000 to spend each month. That's the maximum you're allowed to spend on your football department. And they came to 511. They put in a little bit there for AFLW staff to keep going, to look after the girls throughout the winter. They had a meeting the other week and there was quite a few clubs who are actually saying to the AFL, hey AFL, we need more money. We can't do anything with our AFLW. We've spent all our money on our men's department and we've got nothing with our AFLW because the sign and trade period for the girls is supposed to be now. But they can't do it now because half the clubs don't have any AFLW staff on board. Luckily, for my particular club, Western Bulldogs, they've said, hang on, no, we value the AFLW system. We value them. So as much as we want to spend all our money on our men, that is not living up our values. We say that women are just as important as the men, so we are going to have staff looking after the girls. So we've got 7 staff on board. The majority of the other clubs don't have any staff on board at the moment. So as much as they get out there in the public and they say, we value our AFLW team, we value that program, we value the girls, when push comes to shove, when it means spending money on them, they don't. So they're going against their values. So that would not be a company that I would particularly want to work for. And another very, very quick example, because we've got a little bit of time, is I was talking to Football Victoria, a conference, probably about 5 years ago now. And they let me talk about anything that I wanted to. So I spoke about ethics and value-based decision-making. And I put all the coaches, there was a coach forum, I put them all into groups and gave them scenarios around ethics and value-based decision-making. And said, okay, let's pretend we've got a club. And one of our values is equality. And that's what we say, yeah, everything's equal, we value equality, that's great. And I gave them scenarios. And one particular scenario was that at this club, they've got one main pitch that's grass and a secondary pitch that is synthetic, no grandstands or anything like that. You've got 2 teams, a women's team and a men's team. Both of them play in the National Premier League. So the equivalent level of National Premier League level. You've got a scheduling issue. Both of them are due to play at the same time. And this happens throughout the season. I said, which one gets the good pitch with the grandstand and the nice grass, and which one gets put on the secondary pitch? And they all come back and they all said, well, the men get the good pitch. And I said, but hang on, is that following your value of equality? And as try as they did, the answer was, no, it's not. So I said, if that's the decision that you want to make, you have to take away that value of equality. You can't have that as one of your values. Remove it from every bit of paraphernalia that you've got, every symbol that you've got in the clubhouse, and don't have it there, because you are not making decisions based on your values. And it was a very, very interesting exercise, that one. So I'd ask you, if you've got values at your lifesaving club, maybe judge some of the decisions that you've made of late against those values. Are they in line with your values? Well, if they are, fantastic. If they're not, something has to win out. Is it the decision or is it the value? If they don't line up, you've got to change one of them. So to me, values are simply decision-making tools. They tell you how to behave, how to act. And that's why I encourage people, don't just put down some values because they sound nice. You have to be prepared to live them and come up with the most difficult scenario that you can possibly can that's going to test that value, and then put yourself to the test. Say, when push comes to shove, are we going to spend the money on the female program? Are we going to give the time slot, the equipment to the women's, the kids, whatever it may be, exactly the same? Are we going to share that? Are we prepared to do that? If yes, then great. Have equality as your value. If not, move on. Now, I'll give you a quick example of how it works at the Western Bulldogs. So it's very important to have a vision of what success is. Our vision of success is to be the best women's sporting program in Australia. We're going to put it right out there. We've actually written it on the wall, to be the best women's sporting program in Australia. That's our aim. Here's another wall. There are values: care, inclusiveness, and effort. So we value effort. Okay, not always the outcome, but if you want to come and give 100% effort 100% of the time, well, then we're going to value that. That's our expectation. Inclusiveness. You can feel free to be yourself. You don't have to be this cookie cutter AFL woman player. Doesn't matter what your sexual preference, doesn't matter how you wear your hair, doesn't matter what you do away from the club. We actually embrace you as a person that you are. And the last one is care. It's really important that we care for each other. And okay, they're our values. Now we need to put some behaviours behind it. And you can see there the words, earn a seat on the boat. Now, I'll tell you a bit of a story how this came about. There's a rower. He's possibly the best rower to ever row. His name is Sir Steve Redgrave. He's a British rower. He won a gold medal at 5 consecutive Olympic Games, which is a phenomenal effort. And the last Olympic Games that he rowed in was the Sydney Olympic Games. He's normally rowed in a pair, 2 people in a boat. For Sydney, he jumped up to a 4-seat boat. And just as he announced, I'm jumping up into a boat of 4, he had a press conference. And they said, so Steve, what's your aim? What's the aim of jumping up into a boat of 4? And he said, well, my aim is to be the worst rower in the boat. And they sort of looked at him and said, your aim is to be the worst rower in the boat? What do you mean? And he said, well, I can do that a couple of ways. He said, I can become unfit, stop working on my technique, care less, not put in the right effort, and pretty quickly, I'll be the worst rower in the boat. But doing that will not get me the outcome that I want, which is to win a 5th gold medal. Plus, my pride won't allow me to do that. But he said, the other way that I can become the worst rower in the boat is I can push and teach and mentor and get the most out of these other 3 men in the boat. If I can push them as much as I can, they have the ability to be better than me. And if I'm the best rower in the world and I make these other 3 guys better than me, who's going to beat us? No one. And the fact is, no one did beat them. They won their 5th gold medal or he won his 5th gold medal in a row. So our ethos at the football club, and this is like a theme that we're building our culture around. And the reason why I'm talking about a theme is you need to keep the culture change process front of mind. And because it's very easy to drop off if people don't understand what culture is. So this is our theme. Whenever I mention the worst rower in the boat, the girls know what I'm talking about. So what we do is we've changed our symbols and our systems of what gets rewarded. The symbol is the worst rower in the boat. The system is each week after the game, we'll reward the worst rower and she gets her photo up on the wall. And it's not for the best player, the one who kicks the most goals, the one who gets the most possessions. It's the one who helps her teammate be better. It might be just the way she uses her voice. It might be the way that she picks up the other her teammate's opponent every now and again. It might be because she does a lot of tackles and shepherds and helps her teammates be good. And that is what we actually reward. So if I can get a whole bunch of players out there, number 1, earning their seat in the boat, and 2, making their teammates around them the best player and following that motto there, we rise by lifting others, well then I'm going to get the actions that are required, the way that we do things. It doesn't guarantee success, but it gives us the best chance possible of actually achieving that success. So that's how we're doing things at the Western Bulldogs. That's the culture that I'm trying to create. And the theme that we've chosen is that worst rower. And you might have seen earlier that I actually had some oars up on the wall, bit of symbolism, and everyone has signed those oars. They've signed up to being the worst rower in the boat. So instead of having a to-do list, all of my leaders, they have to put down a to-care list. And that means, who do I just need to talk to? So my to-do list for the day might be, I need to go out and I've got a weight session and I've got a running session. But before I get to my to-do list, who's on my to-care list? So we've got a lot of young girls in the team, so I need to just message the young girls and say, hey, how are you going with your studies? Are you good? How's your program going? They care for the players. Once that's over and done with, then they get into their to-do list, what they have to do for the day. So we're living our value of care, we're putting effort into it, and we're including all the players in. So we're actually trying to live our values. And as I said, it doesn't guarantee success, but it absolutely gives us the best chance of creating that success. Now, very quickly, I'll touch on this. Any culture change process, you need the explorers. You need the people at the front who are really going to drive this. Behind them are the people who go, you know what, I'm an early adapter. I can see what you're trying to build. you convince me that there's something better, you know what, I'm on board. Most of your people at your club are going to be the settlers. They're just going to be there going along, and they're just happily living the way things are going at the moment. They're sort of a bit of oblivious that things can be better and things can be worse. Down the end, you're going to have some old timers. And from what I know about lifesaving, you do have old timers. We've always done things like this. I've been president for 30 years, and I'm not going to relinquish that. You'll have those people. And then you've got the outlaws. They're the ones who will actively work against what you're trying to build. Now, the mistake most people make when they're trying to change the culture is they spend 80% of their time working on the 20% who don't get it. Working on these people, trying to change their mindset, trying to tell them how it's going to be better. That's a waste of time. A far better way of doing it is to look at the low-hanging fruit. Who are the people that I can get on board? Who are the settlers and pioneers? Move them in the direction that you want to move them. Then guess what? The old timers and the outlaws, they have a decision to make. They have a decision. They either jump on board or they jump out the other side. And either way is fine. But because no one likes to be outside the weight of numbers for too long. So you've got to create weight of numbers for your particular culture change. So I'm sure you can identify who at your club are the old timers and the outlaws and who are your pioneers and settlers. If you are going to change the culture, you need to be an explorer at the front. So get that low-hanging fruit, get them moving in your direction. All right, I'm going to come back to everybody now. Hopefully that has worked. I've given you a bit of an overview of what culture and values and how you can actually bring them to life within your club. I would love it if somebody has got a question in the last 6 to 7 minutes or so. If they want to ask a question, happy to answer it.
Nathan, I'll just have a comment. First of all, we certainly do rise by lifting others, and this has kind of reminded me of something that I read a while back from you, and I'm not quite sure if you remember this quote, but you said leadership and culture is a big responsibility, and whether it is one child, a team, or hundreds of people, there is no greater privilege than being able to positively impact another person's life. And I think that's quite relevant now. I have a question, particularly for our aquatic and recreation facilities that are bringing back their staff after some time, but potentially also hiring new staff. What's a bit of personal feedback? What's been one of your main key learnings around authentic culture and change in a time of such turbulence that we've all experienced? Yeah,
it's I look at this as not necessarily a turbulent. It's a change of mindset. You can say, yeah, everything's been up in the air, it's turbulent. We've got staff leaving, we've got new staff, all that sort of stuff. I look at this as an opportunity. Here's an opportunity. So many people, what they do is they just carry on, saying, oh, we'll get to it, we'll get to it. This is almost forcing you to get to it. So when people come back to work, they can either come back and fall straight into the old habits, or they can come back and start doing things differently. This is a great opportunity, a great burning platform for you to actually make the changes that you want to make. And if it means new staff, well, then that's great, because your recruiting process should be, I'm going to recruit people who are going to fit into that new culture that I want to build. If it's value-based people, well, then that will be my interview criteria. Tell me about when you lived your values. Tell me about this. What would you do in this scenario? Whatever it may be. So whilst we can say, yeah, it's really turbulent and it's up in the air, all that sort of stuff, life's going to go on. It's going to get back to a new normal. And if anyone tells you exactly what that new normal is going to look like, they're probably lying. But it will be different. But how different, what it looks like, take control of that. Don't just let it evolve by default. Okay, take control. So it's a really interesting time. And companies who thrive through this, that's what they're doing. The ones who are just paddling, they're probably thinking, oh, okay, we want to get back to doing things the old way. but the old way won't cut it in the new world.
Absolutely fantastic response. I've got a massive smile on my face, and I know I'm conscious of time, but I could certainly listen to you for much longer than what we have. One of our participants has a question for you, Nathan. Yes. Todd Foster's asked, how do you maintain an organisation culture with dispersed teams? By their nature, they can change based on environment, different work, different conversations, etc.
Yeah, it's tough, and a lot of companies, especially now with people working from home all around the place, it does make it tougher. Best way is people will act accordingly to how they get rewarded. It's it's the old sort of carrot and stick. You can use the stick. I think people react far more appropriately when there's a carrot there. So think about, what do you actually reward? And also, how clear are the expectations around behaviours? Because if you leave it open to interpretation, then you're leaving it open to failure. A quick one, one of our values at the football club was being professional. You think, okay, here's men playing football, professional sport, getting paid to do it. That's a no-brainer. But professional actually caused more problems than anything. Take drinking, for example. To me, being professional meant I didn't drink alcohol at all. Didn't help me play, so I didn't drink at all. Being professional for somebody else was, you know what, I can have a beer or red wine with dinner each night, but that just one's not going to hurt me. That's fine. Being professional for somebody else was, I don't drink during the week, but after the game, I'm hell for leather. I've got 7 days before I need to play again. I'm going to go out and enjoy myself. So we had different interpretations of what professional meant. So we had to bring that back to an exact descriptor of what it was. So in the end, it was that no one is ever over 0.05. If you're injured, you don't drink at all. And a beer or a glass of red wine with your dinner at night is okay. So if you've got disparate groups, what I do is make sure that the rewards that they are working towards elicit the behaviours that you want, and make sure those rewards are really well known. And 2, take away any uncertainty around what is actually required. Because you might say, yes, let's be honest, but what honesty for me means something different to somebody else. Come down to behaviours. This is exactly the way that you need to behave, and if you do, you will get rewarded this way.
Nathan, thank you. That was a wonderful response. You're so experienced and so honest, but you're also very, very relevant. That was such a valuable session. If there's any other questions from our listeners, please pop them in the line. But if there isn't, I might look to wrap up this part of the presentation. I have popped in the line Nathan's website. He's a very, very approachable and all-round great guy. So please reach out to Nathan for any support and any resources moving forward. We are moving into a new normal, and there is so much available for us to support us through these times. So thanks so much again, Nathan. You can stay online and listen and keep listening if you want, and I'll obviously be in touch with you shortly. But I just want to thank everyone online as well, our people, for your time and your contribution today. We can't roll out these sessions without you, and I'm sure, well, I hope that everybody was able to get some valuable takeaways and insights. There's certainly some great reminders there as well. Moving forward, we have some opportunities, PD opportunities ahead of us. And that is in the form of tomorrow morning. We have Chris Spink from Glen Ira Leisure, and he'll be presenting great ideas for your club, and that will round out AFAR for this week. Monday coming, we have our Mental Wellbeing Monday series that is open for all of our volunteers, our staff, and of course our aquatic industry partners. We have Mindful Leadership with Sally Cumming, who's the Director of Engage Health. And then we have the return of Nathan Burke doing a masterclass around leading and inspiring for our Blue Connections session. That's going to be a really in-depth session around leadership and understanding what leadership is, the responsibilities and for both teams and individuals. So registration for both those sessions are open. But again, if you need any support, just reach out to me at any stage. And also, if you need any support around pool safety, the team are always there. So please email assessments@lsv.com. As a reminder, this session has been recorded and it will be popped up on the webpage. But again, I absolutely love doing this. I love my job. I love the people that I work with, and you know, you're all absolutely amazing. So thank you again so much for dialing in this morning, and please take care of yourselves and each other, and see you online again soon.